Assalamu alaikum everyone. This is lecture 27 for CS116 object oriented programming. So let's get started. Now previously during two sessions of this week we had been exploring tkinter GUI toolkit, and we explored various widgets. We saw how we can use object oriented approach for making GUIs, and we also worked on this one package matplotlib to plot a 2D line graph. In today's session, I'll create a partial GUI for our application quiz game. I hope you remember this case study which we did last week. I'm calling it partial interface because this application, it consisted of multiple displays, and creating GUIs for all of them, it will take a lot of time. So I've selected just one part of that application, the quiz game only, and I'll create a GUI for that. Now the main point for choosing this and implementing GUI for this quiz game is that I want to show you that how we can synchronize events in a GUI. For example, if you want to delay an event uh, based on the occurrence of some other event like mouse click or any other button click, so I want to show you how you can do that, right? And also I'll show you that why it is so tricky, like why I need to discuss this explicitly. What's the problem with GUI interface? Actually, not the problem, but what is the sequence of the events in GUI because of which you have to work that synchronization thing explicitly. Now let's recall that quiz game first. This was the class diagram that we developed. Our whole application, it consisted of 4 classes, right? First class is question class, which is just storing a question. Actually, it holds structure for containing a question. Question, its options, and the correct answer. Then we had another class, question DB. Question DB is basically, it maintains a list of question type objects. So it has the ability to store that question list into a file and load any question list from any file that we whose link we provide in the code. And this class also provides options for manipulating that question list. Like you can add questions to that list, you can remove questions from that list, etc., etc., right? So basically this question DB class was using question class. So question class was part of question DB class. Then we created another class quiz, and the main purpose of this class quiz was to create a quiz. And here you can see from the functions make quiz, take quiz, and print quiz. These were the functions. And what it does, it instantiates an object of question DB type, because for making quiz it requires that question bank or question list. So question DB is part of class quiz. And in the end, we integrated all these things together through this 4th class, which is called the user interface. Now what I want to do here, in user interface, previously we were offering 2 options. Like a user can manage the question bank, like edit the question bank, or he or she can take the quiz. So there were 2 options which were offered in user interface. So I'm not working on both the options. What I'll do, I'll only create an interface for quiz. Like when the user starts the application, the quiz starts automatically. It asks the users 10 questions and then it displays a score. So I'll create graphical user interface for this. Now this means that this user interface is no longer needed. I don't want to display all those menus, and that is not required. So I won't be needing this class. In fact, I'll create another class in place of this class, which will actually create GUI graphical interface for the application, or for that part of application. Okay, then if you see that quiz class also, there are 3 functions in quiz class: make quiz, take quiz, and print quiz. Now the problem with take quiz and print quiz is that these 2 classes, they were working on shell. Like they were using print statements that printed messages on shell. They were using that function input which was taking input from shell. So I don't need these classes anymore because I'm going to make a graphical user interface. So that means that I don't want to use those same methods, take quiz and print quiz. I'll Now I have two options. I can override these methods. I create another class, subclass from this quiz class, and I override these methods. Or to keep things simple so that we can complete that in this one session, um, since I need only this one method, make quiz, so I will just copy this to my new code, right? In essence, what I want to tell you is that I'll keep this first class, question class, as it is. Okay, I'll keep question db class as it is, and from third class, quiz class, I'll keep only one method, which is make quiz. And I don't need these methods because they were working with the shell. And I don't need this user interface also. So I'll keep those class as it is, question and question db. And since I need only this one function, make quiz, so I'll copy it into my new class, my new GUI class, right? So that's what I'm going to do. So this is the class diagram for my new scheme. So what I have decided, I'm keeping this question class as it is, no change at all. I'm making it part of question db class, like it will be used in question db class. Question db class also stays the same, no change at all. So that means that I just need to include these files from the previous code as it is, right? And this is my third new class, which I'll be creating today with you guys. It is called GUI QG, GUI Quiz Game. And let's not talk about the instance variables right now. We'll see how many we need along the way. And this class will have an initiator method. Then it will have a make quiz method. Now this make quiz method, I'll be copying this method from that quiz class. So this will be exactly the same method. Actually, what was the purpose of this method? This method was supposed to pick 10 questions randomly from question list. So what it does, it basically instantiate an object of QDB type, question DB type. That means it will get that question list from that question bank in question DB type object. And then out of that list, it will randomly select 10 questions and it will create a new list, which was called selected questions list in that method. So since we are copying it, so we'll use the same name here as well. So make quiz method is exactly the same as it was in that quiz class, right? Now the remaining two methods, display quiz and create frame methods. So we'll be writing code for this. So these two. So init function and display quiz and create frame. These are the three methods that we'll write today. And we'll implement the whole GUI using these three methods. Okay, now let's start writing the code. This is my first import statement. I'm importing this class question DB class from module question DB. And I do not need to import question class explicitly because question class is already being imported in this question DB module, right? So that means I'm indirectly importing question module as well. So this is the statement. Now this will work if question DB class and question class, you are keeping them in the same folder in which you are placing this GUI QG.py file. But when I was working, actually I had placed those projects file in a separate folder. So when I was working, what I had to do, I had to share path for this question DB file first. So because it was not in the same folder as the main folder, right? It was in a subfolder within that folder. So Python was not able to find it. So what I had to do, I had to include this statement. Now this statement will append the path where the files are searched. So quiz game is the subfolder within my main folder where GUI QG class resides. And now I am instructing that search in this folder as well. Now I do not have to give the complete path because this directory, quiz game directory, it lies within my main directory. Otherwise you can give a complete path also, absolute path also. And if you see the code file that I'm giving you, there you'll find that absolute path statement commented out. So that will give you an idea how you can do that. Okay, now since this statement sys.path.append belongs to sys module, so in order for this to work, I need to import sys also. Now you do not need to write these two lines if question db module lies in the same folder where GUI QG module lies, right? I am doing this because I have a subfolder inside it, right? So I decided to share this with you so that you may know if you face this problem sometimes, so how you can resolve it, right? So this is it. If okay, this is what I was telling you, and this is the third file that I need to import because I'll be using methods of this class random for selecting random questions from question db, and this is for the GUI. Since I'll be creating labels, buttons, radio buttons, frame, and I'll be using here these two classes also. We talked about these in the first lecture of this week. So today I'll show you how you can use them. Right, so these are the files that we need to import. Now let's come to our first class, actually the main class GUI QG. Now let's start coding our main class GUI QG, and as we have learned in the last two lectures, we'll inherit it from tkinter's class tk, and tk class, it basically creates the main window. So here is the first method, which is the constructor or initiator, and what we do in this constructor, we simply call the constructor of the parent class, which actually creates that window. And now I am customizing that window. I am providing it a name. I am setting its size. I'm not setting max size. I think minimum size, this is enough. Otherwise, it's up to you. You can use many other options to customize the look of that main window. Okay, now here what I'm doing, here I am instantiating an object of question db type, and QDB is that object, and I'm making QDB an instance variable in my new class GUI QG. Now, if you can recall from last week, and if you cannot, then just go and see the file. What this initiator does, this question db initiator does, it basically creates a list of questions and it loads that list from a file. Basically, we have a question bank in a file, and this initiator, it will load questions from that file into a question list, right? And that question list uh, is the main instance variable of this class question db, right? So this is what it does. It loads question bank into QDB using question db class. Now make quiz method, as I told you earlier that I'll just copy it from that previous class. Now you see this instantiation that I did on the previous line, where I created QDB. You can do that instantiation inside the make quiz method as well. So it's up to you. So make quiz method, this is the function of make quiz method. It will randomly select 10 questions from that list, which is contained in QDB instance variable, and it will save them, those selected 10 questions, into a new list called selected questions list. Okay, now then I'll create this method. We'll code this method shortly, and this method will display that selected questions list in GUI form. Okay, and this is the essential event handler. Now let's quickly see this make quiz method. It randomly selects 10 questions from the question database, which was maintained in that QDB instance variable. So okay, this count will keep track of those 10 questions. This is my new instance variable selected questions list, where I'll place those randomly selected questions. This is an infinite loop. Okay, this is randomly selecting a question from that list. Now you see, question list is actually that instance variable inside QDB, which contains the actual list, or which is the list type variable. list of questions basically. And if the randomly selected question is already not in the list, it will simply be added to the list. And we increment the count. And if the count reaches 10, we break out of the loop. Okay, so that's what this method does. I did not change it at all. Now, before starting to code the next method, let's first decide what kind of interface we require. Now, what I would like to do here is I want to display 10 questions one by one. Like as soon as my application starts, it starts displaying questions one by one. And in question, what I want to display the question first. Okay, whatever the question is. And then I'll display 3 options in the form of radio buttons. Right, option 1, option 2, and option 3. And user can select any of these options, and after selecting the option, I'll place here a button called next. And when user presses this button next, the screen goes to the next question. So that means that I'll display one question at a time, and each time I'll display this next button so that user can go to the next screen. And since I'm displaying 10 questions, what I'll do when I come to the 10th question, I'll replace this button with another button called finish, so that the user knows that now the quiz is finished, and if he or she presses this button finish, the score will be displayed, right? So let's create a GUI for this. So now let's start writing this third method, display quiz. Now this first instance variable is very much self-explanatory. Self.score, it's there to keep track of the scores. I'm initializing it to 0, and whenever user answers a question correctly, this instance variable will be incremented, right? So this will keep track of our scores. Okay, now what I intend to do, I intend to display those frames one by one. So therefore, I am creating the frames and displaying them in a loop. So here is a method, create frame method, and the purpose of this method is to create a frame, display question, and collect answer from the user. Okay, once that is done, that frame will be destroyed and a new frame will appear in its place. So basically, this loop will run 10 times, and each time what it will do, it will simply pass one question from selected questions list and the index of that question to this method create frame. Now this selected question list, it contains 10 randomly selected questions. So that means we are passing one question at a time, and we'll be creating a separate frame for each question. So 10 frames, 10 questions. That's all this method, what this method does. Now let's come to this create frame method. Now let's write this method create frame. See here, 2 arguments have been received, q and I. Q is the question and I is the index number of that question. Now just keep in mind that this q is of question type, that class question. So this q is of question type, and this q, it contains an instance variable that holds that question. Actually, it does not only holds the question, but it holds the options and the answer as well, answer number as well, right? So if you recall the format, what we were doing in question class, we were storing the question in a 2D list, right? So there was a main list. First entry or first item of that list was the question in a string format. Second item of that list was a sub list that contained the 3 options in a string format, and the third item in that list was the number of the correct answer, and we used that number to obtain the correct answer from that middle sub list, right? So just keep that in mind. Okay, now here first of all what we do, we create a frame calling this initiator of this frame class. So this will instantiate a frame object and we are assigning it to f. Okay, now I create my first label. this label is for placing question. Okay, before discussing this, I just want to highlight something. Previously, what we had been doing when we were creating GUIs, we were creating two different classes. So one class was inherited from TK and the other class was inherited from frame. You can do that too here, but here I have not done that. Like it's a design choice. So here I have not created two separate classes. So there is only one class which I have inherited from TK. So I have to create this frame explicitly, right? So this frame has been created and F contains the handler to that frame. Now I create my first label and I'll display my first question on this label. So you see Q has been passed to this class, and Q is of question type, and there is an instance variable in question type class which was called question, and this question is actually that 2D list. So I'm accessing first element of that question of that 2D list, and this is the question. So here that question is in the form of a string. So that string I'm just passing it to this parameter text, and it will be displayed on that label. So this statement will result in displaying my first question on a label, right? Now what okay, this is what it does. And what should I do next? I should pack this on my frame, right? And since you see first parameter of that label initiator, it was F, that means that I'm placing this label in my frame F. Okay, now next we need to place 3 radio buttons. Now we have not used radio buttons so far. What's different about radio buttons? Actually, radio buttons, they work in groups. You create more than one radio buttons and you place them all in a single group, and the user is allowed to select only one radio button out of that group. You guys have used this in quizzes also. So when you are given radio buttons, those round buttons, you are only allowed to select one out of them, right? So what we'll do here, we'll create 3 radio buttons and we'll keep them in a group. And how we keep them in a group? Actually, we tie them to the same GUI variable, right? Now here comes the use of those GUI classes that we discussed in the first lecture. There were 4 GUI classes: string var, double var, int var, and boolean var. Actually, the problem here is in GUIs that GUI's event handler cannot read an ordinary variable or an ordinary integer or float or string or boolean variable. Like if you are defining an instance variable or a class variable or a local variable which is of normal type, normal integer, normal float, or a string, then that won't be readable by the event handler of your GUI. So if you want that event handler to read a variable, you have to instantiate a variable of this GUI variable type. So you use any of those 4 classes and create variables using them. Only these variables are recognizable or readable within a GUI, right? So we are here creating a string variable radio selection, and I'm associating this variable to my frame, which is F, and I'm initializing it to an empty string. Now here you can create any kind of variable. Actually, I need a variable to bind my radio buttons, my 3 radio buttons that I'll be creating next. So here I'm using a string variable because as you'll see shortly that I'll be using values A, B, C as options. So since A, B, C are a string type, therefore I'm using here string variable. Okay, so this is it. So this is a string variable, but this is a kind of variable that is readable by my GUI. Now let's create our first radio button. So for this, I'll use this class radio button. The first argument to this class, actually we are calling the constructor of this class. So the first argument to the constructor is F. That means I am placing my radio button in my frame F, right? F is my current frame. And I need to display my first option on this radio button. So how can I access my option? It lies there in question index 1, index 0. Then second option will be in question index 1, index 1, then question index 1, index 2. So that's how my question list has been arranged. So basically this text is equals to q dot question 10. This is simply selecting my option, first option, and it placing it as text on this first radio button. Right now, this is not all. I have to associate this radio button to my group. So for that, what I need to do, there is another parameter called variable. Now you assign that radio selection variable to variable. Now this radio selection will remain same for all my radio buttons. So actually this will tie all my radio buttons together. So I'm setting this parameter variable to my that string type variable that I created just before radio selection, right? And in the end, I'm assigning a value to this radio button. So value parameter takes a value. I'm assigning this alphabet small a. So that means if the user selects this radio button, my first radio button, then value will be a, right? And since value is of a string type, that's why I set radio selection to be of a string type. If you set a value to be of like integer type or float type, so then you use that GUI variable class accordingly, right? Now why I am using this a, because this will help me use that check answer option in my question class, because my question class takes ABC as option and then returns to me if the answer is true or false. So that's why I'm using this ABC. Otherwise you could have used any type, any data type here, integers or floats or anything, right? Okay, so this is my first radio button. Similarly, I will create another radio button. Oh, now you see this radio selection, it will catch the selection actually, right? So whatever value you assign to this value parameter, that will be assigned to this radio selection. And this radio selection is common for all the radio buttons. So that means whichever radio button that you select, its value will be transferred to radio selection. So let's create another button. This is okay. First, let's pack it to the frame. Then we'll create the second button. It's created the same way. The only difference is that I'm choosing a different name for this radio button. I'm choosing RB2, whereas previously it was RB1. And I am displaying a different option here. I am displaying q.question11. That means this is the second option. And I'm assigning it value B. So if this option is selected, then radio selection will hold this value B. And let's pack it to the frame and create a third button, because we have three options. Now you see again I've changed the name of radio button and I have changed the option to be displayed on that radio button, and I have selected value C for it. So if this option is selected, then radio selection will hold C, and I'm packing it into the frame. So these are the three radio buttons that I'm placing on my frame, right? So in a nutshell, what will happen here? Here I have defined a GUI type string variable, radio selection, and whichever option or whichever radio button user selects, its corresponding value will be transferred to radio selection. And I'll then read this radio selection variable and we'll see if the answer is correct or not. So we have placed the question on the frame. We have placed three radio buttons containing the options on the frame. And now what we need to place? We need to place a button here. And if you recall, as I explained you on Jamboard, for first 9 questions, we'll use that button next. And for the 10th question, we'll use another type of button. Actually, not another type of button, another named button called finish. So here's the logic. If I is less than 9, I hope you recall this. I is the parameter that has been passed to this create frame method, and it basically contains the index of my question. So if it is less than 9, that means question 8 means that's the 9th question, because we are starting from 0. I is equals to 0. So if I is less than 9, that means that we need to display next button. So here I am creating a button and I'm putting that label next on it, and there is a method associated with it, next clicked. So whenever this button will be clicked, next clicked will be called. And obviously I'll implement this later in this code. Else I'll create the same button, but I'll name it finish, and I'll call another method finish click method. Actually, when user clicks finish, we have to do some extra things. We need to display score as well. Whereas when user clicks next button, we just have to go to the next frame. We just have to calculate or update the score, and we have to move to the next frame. Whereas in finish, we'll update the score and we'll move to the next frame, but next frame will be a different frame. It will simply display the result. Okay. So this is what we are doing, and then we'll pack this button to our frame. And then we need to pack the frame too. Now we have placed all those widgets that we were supposed to place on that frame. So the frame is ready. Now that frame can be packed to the main window. Okay, now let's suppose we have already implemented this next clicked and finish clicked methods or functions actually, and they are working just fine. Now that means that the code is complete. Now if you run this code, there is one problem in this code. The loop in the previous method where we were creating 10 frames and then we were creating create frame method each time, that loop will run in one go. Like what if you run this code up till now, what we have coded up till now, assuming that we have already implemented next clicked and finish clicked methods or functions. So what will happen if you run this code? It will not display your frames one by one. What it will do, it will display all the frames at once, because what happens when you are creating a GUI, all the code that you write into that initiator or into your GUI, it is executed in one go, and after that it waits for any user inputs if you are if you have planned that, right? So the problem here is that if you run this code, it will not change frames for every question. It will display all the frames in the main window. First frame will be displayed with first question, second frame will be displayed with second question, third, and so on, right? So you'll be seeing all the questions in just one main GUI window. So that's not what we had wanted. We want each question to appear alone at a time, right? So for that, we need to implement some logic. Actually, what we want here, we want to synchronize these appearance of these frames on this next button or finish button. Like I want that until or unless the user presses this next button or finish button, the frame should not change or new frame should not be added. So GUI doesn't work normally that way. So whatever you are writing in that GUI, that will be displayed all at once, right? So in order to hold the screen, we need to do some synchronization, and let's see how we can do that. That is the main point of designing this GUI, to show you how you can synchronize those events. Now for this purpose, we'll use a method wait variable. Now I hope you can recall this. I discussed actually not discussed this, I introduced this method in the first lecture of this week, and I told you that we'll use it later. So this method, it will be used to create that synchronization. Now wait variable, it waits on a variable, and it waits on which variable? It waits on the variable which is passed to it as parameter. So I'm passing here a variable, and the name of that variable is wait, right? So this method, wait variable method, it waits for this variable to become true, right, or to become non-zero. So what it will do, it will keep checking this variable, and we have to assign this variable some value other than true, and that is actually 0. So we have to assign it a value of 0, and we'll keep it 0 unless we want this wait to be over. So whenever we want this wait to be over, we'll just change it to 1, right? So that means I have to define this variable wait. Now I'm associating this method. Actually this method, it can be called on any widget. So I'm associating this method, or I'm calling this method on my button. So that means that now my event handler will wait for my button to click. So what I'll do, I'll make, actually it is waiting on this variable wait. So this, I'll make this variable wait true or non-zero inside my button function, in next click function or finish click function, like whichever I want to, there I'll turn it true, right? And until or unless I go into that function, this variable weight will remain false. And when I'll go into that function, whenever user clicks this button next or finish. So that's how I synchronize it. So whenever you want the your GUI to wait on certain event, you simply call this method on that widget. Let's suppose I'm calling here on that button, and you create a variable and set it to some false value, and then make it true whenever you want the wait to be over. So that's how it works. Now this weight, it cannot be an ordinary variable like ordinary integer or boolean variable. As I told you, that GUI does not recognizes those ordinary variables, so this weight has to be of GUI variable class. So here I'm defining it to be of integer type, right? And I'm initializing it to value 0. You can initialize it in the constructor as well, but I'm initializing it explicitly. So these three statements, they are basically making one frame wait for next button click. So the frame does not change, or new frame does not appears or is not created until or unless this wait variable changes its value, right? So if you do not include these three statements in your code, then you will not get the output as we had planned, right? So you can try this by removing this. I would like you to remove this code, these three lines, and see what difference does it make to your GUI later. Now let's write these functions, next clicked and finish click. They are comparatively simpler. So what I'll do, I'll simply call this method, check answer method, on my question class, and I'll pass that radio selection value to it. Now radio selection is of string var type, so if I want to obtain its value, I'll use the getter function. So it will return to me A or B or C, and that A or B or C will be passed to check answer method. So check answer method is the method already defined in question class. So it will return true if the answer is correct and false otherwise. So if the answer is true, I'll update the score. Okay. And then what I'll do, I'll destroy this frame because I want next frame to appear. So the task of this current frame is over. So I'll destroy this frame. And one more thing that I need to do now here is I need to make this wait variable true. So I'll set it to 1. So that means when the user will click this button next, answer will be checked, score will be updated, and after doing that, it will set it to 1. That means now the next frame can be displayed. Now what happens in finish click function? You see, whatever I did in next click has to be repeated here. Like I'll check the answer, I'll destroy the frame, I'll set that wait variable to 1, and additionally what I'll do here, I'll display the score as well. So for the first few tasks, I'm calling next clicked so that I don't have to repeat the code, and after that I'm creating another label which will display the result. See, I'm creating an appropriate string, you scored, and then here I'll print self.score out of 10 because there were 10 questions in total, and then I'll pack this to my frame, and that's it, right? Now you see these two functions, if you go see the files, I have defined these two functions within create frame method. So basically these are not independent methods of that class, but these are private functions within that class method. And one more thing is that these methods, they must be placed at start of these functions must be placed at the start of the create frame method, because they must be placed before they are called. That's how functions work. So here I have discussed them in the end, but in the file you will find them in the beginning of that create frame method. Okay, so that's it. That was all. Now in order to display or run that program, I just need to instantiate an object of GUI QG type, and this is the output. This is the first screen that will be displayed. So see, it looks nice. the question, 3 radio buttons, and then there is a next button. You'll first select any of these 3 options, and then you click the next button. And if you do not select any option, then an empty string will be returned, will be considered, which will be considered as a wrong answer. So this is my first screen. Next 8 screen will be the same, only questions will be different. This is my second last screen where finish button will appear. And this is my last screen where score will appear. Now I hope you have understood what I was trying to tell you. Now I want you to make a small change in this GUI. I want you to print the wrong answers too. Not actually the wrong answers, but I want you to print those questions along with correct answer on screen which user failed to answer correctly. So I want something like this. You scored 7 out of 10, so 3 questions were answered wrong, and the wrong answers, they are written here along with the correct answer, right? You can just go try that application. It's it's a nice game, nice quiz game, and just see how much you score. Now what happens in finish click function? You see, whatever I did in next click has to be repeated here. Like I'll check the answer, I'll destroy the frame, I'll set that wait variable to 1, and additionally what I'll do here, I'll display the score as well. So for the first few tasks, I'm calling next clicked so that I don't have to repeat the code, and after that I'm creating another label which will display the result. See, I'm creating an appropriate string, you scored, and then here I'll print self.score out of 10 because there were 10 questions in total, and then I'll pack this to my frame, and that's it, right? Now you see these 2 functions. If you go see the files, I have defined these 2 functions within create frame method. So that's all for today. Thank you.